The alarm exploded at 5 a.m. Before I could silence it, my phone rang. "Mrs. Dawson," the building manager whispered, panicked. "Your daughter-in-law is downstairs with movers. She says you signed the house over. She says you're unwell." For a second I couldn't breathe. Unwell? I opened the security app, saw her face in the lobby. Confident, calm, smiling. I froze. And then, I did something she never expected. "Let her in," I said. "I'm glad you're here with me." Before I tell you what happened next, please like this story, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're listening from. Because what happened that morning could happen to anyone. That morning, the sky over Juneau was still dark blue, heavy with fog rolling in from the bay. The kind of blue that doesn't belong to night anymore, but isn't brave enough to become morning. I had gone to bed believing everything was finally calm. The night before, I had made chamomile tea in my small white porcelain pot, the one my husband bought me 20 years ago because he said I deserved something delicate and stubborn at the same time. I remember standing barefoot in the kitchen, waiting for the water to boil, listening to the steady hum of the heater moving warm air through the vents. I watered my plants, touched each leaf as if taking attendance. The fiddle leaf fig near the window, the rosemary on the sill, the old orchid that blooms only when it feels respected. Then I sat at my desk. A draft of my updated will lay open beside a yellow legal pad covered in my neat, deliberate handwriting. I had reviewed every line carefully, adjusted details, removed assumptions, added protections. I remember thinking how peaceful life finally felt again. Ryan had visited earlier that week. We'd had dinner together. Salmon baked with lemon and dill, the way he liked it when he was 10 years old and still left his sneakers by the back door. He'd stayed longer than usual. He even washed the dishes without me asking. When he hugged me goodbye, he held me firmly. "Love you, Mom," he said. Everything seemed normal. The house was quiet. The heater hummed softly. The ocean beyond the cliffs sounded steady and harmless. There is a particular comfort in familiar sounds. The refrigerator clicking on, the pipes settling, the distant call of a gull somewhere near the water. That night, as I climbed into bed, I felt something rare. Security. Not financial. Not practical. Emotional security. For the first time in months, I did not lie awake wondering if I had forgotten something. I did not question my memory. I did not replay conversations to check for errors. I simply slept, which is why the alarm at 5 a.m. felt so violent. And the phone call felt even worse. When the building manager said the words, "She says you're unwell," I remember staring at the ceiling and trying to assemble the sentence into something logical. Unwell how? I had driven myself to the grocery store the day before, balanced my accounts, spoken clearly with my attorney, read 3 chapters of a novel without losing the plot. I was not unwell. But doubt is a dangerous seed. It doesn't need proof to begin growing. As I sat upright in bed, the early light barely touching the edges of the curtains, I felt something colder than fear. Confusion. Courtney wouldn't do something like that. Would she? I replayed our last conversation. She had been polite. Almost overly polite. She brought herbal tea again. Though this time I didn't drink it. She asked about my sleep. About my blood pressure. About whether I had considered simplifying my life. Simplifying. Such a gentle word. I remember noticing the way she looked around the living room as she spoke. Not admiring. Measuring. She commented on the antiques. The silver. The framed photographs. "That's a lot to manage at your age," she had said softly. At your age. I had smiled then. But later that night, I reviewed the kitchen camera footage again. Just to be certain. I had already seen it once. Her hand opening my sugar jar weeks earlier. Pouring in that fine white powder from a small vial. Moving carefully. Confidently. The lab report confirmed what my instincts had screamed. Benzodiazepines. High dosage. Enough to mimic early cognitive decline. Enough to make me forget small things. Enough to make others question me. Enough to build a case. Which is why, 2 weeks ago I changed the locks. Why I updated my will. Why I transferred certain assets into a protected trust. Why I installed additional cameras. Not because I was paranoid. Because I was paying attention. Now watching her on my phone screen outside my door, I realized something else. She believed her plan was working. She believed I was confused. Slower. Weaker. She believed I would panic. Instead, I stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. I brushed my hair. Put on a navy sweater. Fastened the small pearl earrings my husband once said made me look dangerously calm. I did not rush. Because panic would serve her. Composure would serve me. When the elevator chimed on my floor, I was already walking toward the door. And I knew something with complete clarity. That morning was not the beginning of my collapse. It was the beginning of hers. The camera feed had a slight delay, just enough to make everything feel unreal, like I was watching a rehearsal instead of my own life. Courtney stood at the front desk with her shoulders back, the way she did at restaurants when she wanted a table that wasn't available. She didn't speak loudly, but she didn't need to. People like her know how to make a room lean in. The building manager, Martin, kept his hands clasped in front of him, eyes darting between her folder and the movers behind her. I'd known Martin for 8 years. He had carried packages to my door in snowstorms, found my spare key once when I dropped it in the parking lot, and called me ma'am, with the kind of respect that comes from habit. Now he looked as if he didn't know which version of me was true. Courtney slid a stack of papers across the counter and tapped the top page with one manicured finger. My mother-in-law is mentally declining, she said, clearly enough that the microphone caught every syllable. She forgets medications. She forgets dates. She becomes confused. I have power of attorney. Power of attorney. It is a phrase that sounds administrative until you realize what it can become in the wrong hands. Martin's mouth opened and closed once. I watched him swallow. I wasn't informed, he said, careful, as if speaking to someone unpredictable. She wouldn't remember to inform you, Courtney replied sweetly. That's the problem. One of the movers shifted, adjusting the strap on his dolly. Another glanced at his clipboard, not wanting to be part of this conversation but stuck inside it anyway. They were hired muscle, not villains, and I could see the discomfort on their faces. Men who had lifted couches all their lives, suddenly asked to lift a woman's dignity too. Courtney turned slightly so her profile faced the camera. She knew she looked good. She wore that calm smile that says, I'm the reasonable one. We're here to move her things, she continued. She's going into a safer situation. Safer. That word again. Always spoken like a blanket, always used like a leash. In my bedroom, I could hear nothing but the faint hum of my heater and my own breathing. My fingers tightened around the phone until the case creaked. If she convinced the building staff I was unstable, she wouldn't need to break in. Doors open for concern. Rules bend for family. Paperwork becomes permission. I thought of the bank. My accounts. The trust I'd built after my husband died. The deed. The will I'd revised, quietly, carefully, because something in me had stopped accepting comfort as proof of love. If she got the bank to believe I wasn't competent, she could freeze my access in a single afternoon. If she got a court-appointed guardian, I could lose the right to decide where I lived, what I ate, who I spoke to, even whether I was allowed to be alone. And the most terrifying part wasn't the money. It was the story she was writing about me. A woman declining. A woman confused. A woman who needed someone else to speak for her. Courtney lifted her phone, pretending to dial someone, then leaned toward Martin and lowered her voice. The microphone still caught it. She's stubborn, she murmured. If she refuses to cooperate, we'll document it. It helps the case. The case. My life reduced to a file. My fear sharpened into something cleaner. I had been afraid of losing things. Now I understood I was being positioned to lose myself. I swiped to another camera angle. The lobby entrance. There on the glass I saw my own reflection in the monitor. Hair slightly mussed, face pale in the phone's glow, eyes wide but focused. I looked like a woman who had been woken too early. I did not look confused. I did not look unwell. I looked awake. Courtney turned, giving the movers a brisk nod. Let's go, she said, as if this were settled. Martin hesitated, then glanced toward the elevator, then back at the papers. He looked caught between policy and pity. That was when my phone rang again, Martin returning to my earlier call. Mrs. Dawson, he whispered, as if she might hear him through the walls. She's insisting. She says you authorized this. She says you're not in your right mind. Not in my right mind. The audacity of it made my vision go very still. I could have yelled. I could have demanded he call the police. I could have told him to refuse them entry. But outrage is noisy, and noisy women are easy to label. So I kept my voice calm. I understand, I said. A pause. Ma'am, what do you want me to do? I looked at Courtney again. At her relaxed posture, her controlled smile, the certainty in the way she held that folder like a weapon that had already won. And I made my choice. Let her in, I said softly. Send them up. Martin didn't answer for a moment. Then quietly, are you sure? Yes, I said. I'm sure. I ended the call before he could talk me out of it. In the lobby, Martin pressed a button. The elevator doors opened. Courtney stepped inside without hesitation, as if she'd always belonged in the space that was mine. The movers followed. The doors slid shut. And on my phone screen, the elevator began to rise. The elevator numbers glowed upward on my screen. 3, 4, 5. Each soft mechanical chime felt like a countdown. While I waited, something inside me loosened. Not into panic, but into memory. Fear has a way of unlocking doors you did not intend to open. And suddenly I was no longer standing in my bedroom at dawn. I was back in Sitka. The wedding reception had been held in a cedar lodge overlooking gray water and distant mountains. The scent of wood was thick and clean, mingling with champagne and fresh salmon. String lights hung from the beams, casting everything in a forgiving golden haze. Ryan stood at the center of the room with his arm around Courtney's waist. He looked proud, taller somehow, as if marriage had elevated him. I remember studying her that night. Not her dress. It was tasteful, expensive, structured perfectly to suggest elegance without vulnerability. Not her hair, which was pinned into a flawless twist. I watched her eyes. She smiled constantly. But her eyes did not soften when she looked at Ryan. They assessed, measured, calculated. When she hugged me during the reception, she pressed her cheek against mine and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll take care of him now." The words were polite, but something in the tone suggested ownership. Linda sat beside me at our small round table, nursing a glass of white wine. She had worked 35 years as a nurse before retiring. She has always trusted patterns more than charm. "Watch her," she murmured quietly. I laughed at the time. I accused her of being protective, of being skeptical because we were older and less trusting. "She's ambitious," Linda corrected gently. "And ambition without warmth can turn sharp." I dismissed it. Ryan had lost his father at 25. I had watched him crumble quietly in the years that followed. When he told me he'd met someone in Seattle, "She's perfect, Mom," I wanted to believe him. He sounded steady again. Certain. Happy. After so many quiet dinners across from an empty chair, I did not want to be the woman who questioned his light. So I ignored the small things. The way Courtney asked about the house's value before asking about family traditions. The way she complimented my antique sideboard, then casually asked whether it was insured. The way she suggested, just weeks after the wedding, that Ryan and I should consolidate assets for simplicity. Simplicity. There it was again. In the months that followed, her helpfulness intensified. She brought herbal tea blends she said were great for sleep. After drinking them, I would feel heavy by mid-afternoon. Slower. Slightly disoriented. I blamed stress at first. She offered to organize my paperwork. When I later searched for my original property deed, it had been moved to a different drawer. Once, she gently asked whether I'd considered appointing someone to help manage things before it becomes overwhelming. Before what becomes overwhelming? My life? My independence? At the time, I told myself she meant well. Because accepting anything else would mean acknowledging that my son had married a woman who saw me not as family, but as infrastructure. The elevator chimed again on my screen. 6. I blinked and returned to the present. The kitchen camera view filled my phone as the elevator doors opened on my floor. Courtney stepped out first, heels quiet against the carpet. The movers followed with their equipment, trying not to make eye contact with one another. I set my phone down on the dresser and walked into the hallway. The house was still. Morning light had just begun to filter through the tall windows at the end of the corridor. It illuminated the framed photographs on the wall, Ryan as a toddler in rubber boots. Ryan at high school graduation. Ryan beside his father on a fishing boat years ago. All the years I had protected him. All the sacrifices folded neatly into ordinary days. The doorbell rang. Once. Then again longer this time. Margaret. Courtney's voice floated through the wood, bright and controlled. We're here to help you get settled. Help. I placed my hand on the doorknob and felt something unexpected. Not fear. Grief. Because even now, part of me wished this were a misunderstanding. Wished she would step inside and apologize. Wished my son would appear behind her and say, "Mom, this isn't what it looks like." But the memory of the sugar jar stopped that wish before it formed fully. 3 weeks ago, I had reviewed footage from the small camera, hidden behind a row of cookbooks. I had watched her unscrew the lid, pour the powder, stir gently, close it again. Her movements were practiced. Unhurried. That was the moment something in me shifted permanently. Not into anger. Into clarity. The doorbell rang again. I inhaled slowly. That morning was not simply an attempt to move furniture. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of positioning. Courtney believed she had prepared for this. What she did not know was that I had prepared too. And unlike her, I had not underestimated the woman she intended to erase. I opened the door slowly. Courtney stood there with a smile already prepared, as if she had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "Margaret," she said warmly, stepping forward as though this were a social call. "Good. You're dressed. That makes this easier." Behind her, the movers shifted their weight. One of them gave me a brief nod, polite, almost apologetic. "I didn't realize I was expecting guests," I replied. My voice sounded calm. Too calm, perhaps. But I have learned something over 70 years. When people arrive certain of your weakness, composure unsettles them more than shouting ever could. Courtney held up the folder. "We discussed this," she said. "You've been struggling lately. Forgetting things. Leaving the stove on. Getting confused about dates." "I see," I answered quietly. "And who told you that?" Her smile flickered just slightly. "You did," she said. "Several times. Gaslighting, I have learned, is rarely dramatic. It is gentle, repetitive, delivered in the tone of someone who believes they are helping you remember." "I did not," I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if we were sharing something private. "Margaret, please don't make this difficult. The evaluation is already scheduled. We just need to transition you somewhere safe for now." The evaluation. The word landed carefully, officially, as if this were paperwork, not a maneuver. One of the movers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are we moving items today, or?" Courtney turned to him quickly. "Yes. Start with the bedroom furniture." She didn't ask me. She didn't wait. That was her mistake. "Stop," I said. It was not loud. Did not need to be. The men froze. Courtney's posture stiffened. "Margaret, we've already coordinated this." "With whom?" I asked gently. "With your physician," she replied quickly. "And your attorney." "My attorney?" I tilted my head. "Which one?" Silence stretched for half a second too long. She recovered smoothly. "The one who drafted your previous will." Previous. Not current. She did not know I had changed it. I stepped aside just enough to let morning light fall fully across my face. I wanted her to see my eyes clearly. "Courtney," I said evenly, "you will not enter my home without my permission." Her jaw tightened. "You're not thinking clearly." "There it is," I murmured. "The diagnosis." One of the movers shifted again. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble." "You won't have any," I assured him. Courtney's patience thinned. "Margaret, you've been confused for weeks. You forgot your banking password. You misplaced your keys. You left the sugar jar open." "The sugar jar." She said it too quickly. I watched her realize it. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "Yes," I said softly. "The sugar jar." I took a step forward, not threatening, just deliberate. "It's interesting you mentioned that," I continued, "because I had the contents of that jar tested." The hallway felt suddenly narrower. Courtney did not blink. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Benzodiazepines," I said calmly. "High dosage. enough to mimic cognitive decline. The movers looked at one another now, discomfort spreading visibly between them. Courtney laughed. A light, dismissive sound. That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked. I reached into the small table drawer by the door and withdrew a thin folder of my own. Lab results. Printed. Dated. Official. I did not hand them to her. I simply let her see the top page. Her composure fractured just slightly. The kind of fracture only someone watching carefully would notice. You're paranoid, she said, but her voice had lost its earlier smoothness. No, I replied. Prepared. Behind her, the elevator chimed again. Someone else had arrived on the floor. Courtney glanced back instinctively. I saw calculation returning to her eyes. You're making a mistake, she said more quietly now. Ryan agrees with me. He's worried. That hurt. Not because I believed her, but because I knew it was possible. She had been building this narrative for months. Small comments. Subtle doubts. Concerns voiced in private. All it takes is repetition to turn suspicion into belief. You may tell Ryan, I said evenly, that I am not declining. I am documenting. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't over, she said. No, I agreed softly. It's just beginning. And for the first time since she stepped onto my floor that morning, she understood that she had miscalculated. Not my memory, not my strength, but my awareness. Courtney took a small step back from the doorway, as if the air had suddenly shifted against her. She glanced at the folder in her hand, then at me, and for the first time that morning her smile looked practiced instead of natural. Margaret, she said evenly, you're not thinking clearly. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me. From myself. I did not answer immediately. I simply looked at her, at the way she held her shoulders, at the tight control in her jaw, at the careful rhythm of her breathing. She was waiting for me to unravel. Waiting for confusion. Waiting for proof. Instead, I gave her silence. Silence unsettles people who expect resistance. One of the movers cleared his throat. The other shifted his weight and looked toward Courtney, uncertainty creeping into his expression. Ma'am, he asked her quietly, are we moving things or not? Courtney straightened. Yes, she said firmly. We are. Start with the bedroom. She tried to move past me. I did not step aside. You will not enter my home, I said calmly. Her patience thinned. You're proving my point, she replied. This defensiveness, this paranoia, it's exactly why the evaluation is necessary. The evaluation. A clinical word. Sterile. Final. She reached toward the lock again, this time not with a key but with something small and metallic she drew from her coat pocket. Thin. Precise. Prepared. That detail did not escape me. Her phone buzzed suddenly. She hesitated, annoyed, and answered quickly. Yes, she whispered. I watched her face change, only slightly but enough. No, she continued in a low voice. She's awake. Earlier than expected. A pause. Then softer, sharper. The sugar didn't work fast enough. We'll push the guardianship today. The sugar. The word did not shock me anymore. 3 weeks earlier, I had installed hidden cameras in my kitchen. I had begun feeling unusually drowsy in the afternoons, slightly fogged, slow to retrieve simple words. I blamed aging at first. Until I reviewed the footage. I watched her unscrew the lid of my sugar jar. Watched her pour a fine white powder from a small vial. Watched her stir gently, replace the lid and wipe the rim clean. Careful. Confident. The lab results came in a plain white envelope. Benzodiazepines. High dosage. Enough to mimic early cognitive decline. Enough to build a narrative. And narratives are powerful weapons. Courtney ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. When she turned to me again, her smile was thinner. Margaret, she said softly, please don't make this harder than it has to be. For whom? I asked. She ignored the question and turned back to the door, sliding the metal tool toward the lock. That was when I made my decision. Not in anger. Not in panic. But with clarity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With one steady motion, I pressed a single button, the one I had programmed 2 weeks ago. Not for drama. For protection. Courtney still believed she was in control. She believed this was the final step in a quiet takeover. What she did not yet understand was that I had already documented everything. The footage, the lab report, the audio. And as she worked at my lock, certain that I was a confused old woman clinging to independence she could no longer manage, something else was already moving down the hallway. Not fear, not doubt, authority. And unlike her plan, it did not rely on persuasion. The footsteps did not rush. They moved with the steady, deliberate rhythm of people who were accustomed to entering tense rooms. Courtney turned fully now, the thin metal tool still caught inside my lock. The movers stepped back instinctively, as if distance might protect them from whatever was unfolding. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway slid open. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Not dramatic, not shouting, calm. Anchorage police. One of them announced evenly, "Everyone stay where you are." Courtney's face drained of color so gradually it almost looked like bad lighting. "This is ridiculous," she said quickly, straightening her coat. "There's been a misunderstanding. My mother-in-law is unwell. I have legal authority." She reached for her folder, flipping it open with hands that were no longer entirely steady. The officer closest to her did not take the papers. "We'll review everything," he said calmly. "For now, step away from the door." The metal tool slipped from her fingers and landed softly on the carpet. The sound was small, but final. I stood just inside my doorway, hands folded lightly in front of me. I did not tremble. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. The second officer glanced at me. "Ma'am, are you Margaret Dawson?" "Yes," I replied. "Did you request assistance?" "I did." Courtney turned sharply toward me. "You called the police?" she demanded, disbelief overtaking her composure. "I pressed a button," I answered quietly. The officer nodded. "We received a live distress signal and audio feed," he said, "including statements regarding medication and guardianship." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. The mover slowly backed farther away from Courtney. "I was speaking hypothetically," she said quickly. "She's confused. She misinterprets things. This is exactly what I've been trying to explain." "About the sugar?" the officer asked mildly. Her mouth opened, closed. The hallway seemed to narrow. One of the officers gestured gently. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us so we can clarify a few things." "You can't be serious," she snapped, her polished tone fracturing. "This is my family. And she is the homeowner," he replied. Just then the elevator chimed again. I did not need to look to know who had arrived. Ryan stepped into the hallway. His face was pale, eyes wide, as if he had run all the way from the parking lot. He took in the uniforms, the movers, his wife standing rigid near my door. "Mom," he said, voice cracking slightly. "What's going on?" Courtney moved toward him immediately. "She's spiraling," she said urgently. "She called the police. She thinks I—" The officer interrupted gently. "Sir, we have recorded audio of your wife discussing medication placed in this residence." Ryan froze. He looked at Courtney, then at me. "Medication," he repeated slowly. I met his eyes. For a brief second, I saw the boy who once held my hand crossing streets. The teenager who asked me for advice before his first job interview. The young man who cried quietly at his father's funeral. "I had the contents of my sugar jar tested," I said calmly. "Benzodiazepines. High dosage." Ryan's face went still. "That's insane," Courtney said sharply. "She's twisting everything." The officer held up a small device. "The audio was clear," he said. "The sugar didn't work fast enough. We'll push the guardianship today." "Those were your words, ma'am." The hallway became very quiet. The movers stood motionless. Ryan looked at his wife as if seeing her from a new angle, one he had never considered. "Courtney," he whispered, "tell me that's not true." She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Truth does not shout. It lands. The officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, we'll need you to accompany us for further questioning." "This is absurd," she snapped, but her voice trembled now. "She's manipulating all of you." "No," I said softly. She turned toward me. eyes flashing with something that was no longer calculation. It was fear. "You underestimated me," I continued quietly. "That was your only mistake." The officer gently guided her hands behind her back. The click of metal cuffs was precise and unceremonious. Ryan did not move. He simply watched. The woman he had trusted, the mother he had doubted, and the thin line between them. As the officers escorted Courtney toward the elevator, she turned her head once more. "You think you've won?" she said under her breath. I held her gaze. "I never intended to lose," I replied. The elevator doors closed. The hallway fell silent again. Only the hum of the building remained. Ryan stood there, shoulders slack, as if something inside him had collapsed quietly. "Mom," he said after a long moment. "I didn't know." I believed him. And that hurt more than the betrayal. Because ignorance can be as dangerous as malice. And trust, once fractured, never returns in the same shape. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear someone swallow in the second row. Not because people didn't care, but because truth, even when everyone is expecting it, demands silence. I sat upright on the wooden bench, my handbag resting neatly on my knees, as if posture were the last thing in my life I could still control. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had already cried. Not here. Not in front of strangers. I had cried weeks earlier in my kitchen, under the hum of the stove light, staring at a simple glass sugar jar and realizing someone had tried to turn me into a diagnosis. Courtney sat at the defense table in a pale gray blouse. No designer coat. No polished confidence. Her hair was pulled back simply, as if even vanity had been stripped away. She did not look at me. She stared at a fixed point on the table, as though she could still rearrange the narrative if she concentrated hard enough. Ryan sat between us, not as a bridge but as a fracture. His hands gripped the edge of the bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. His knee bounced in small, nervous movements. He did not look at her. He did not look at the judge. He stared at the floor, as if the answer to everything lay somewhere near his shoes. The prosecutor read the charges without emotion. Attempted poisoning, fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Each word sounded sterile, administrative, but to me they were not words. They were mornings at 5 o'clock. They were herbal tea left untouched. They were conversations where I began doubting my own memory. When the judge pronounced the sentence, 8 years, no one gasped. There was no dramatic release. Just a deep, cold finality. Courtney finally lifted her eyes. For one brief second, her gaze brushed over me. There was no apology there. Only disbelief. As if she had not planned for this possibility. As if consequences were something that happened to other people. Then I felt movement beside me. Ryan slowly turned his head toward me. His face looked older than it had weeks ago. Not in years, in weight. "Mom," he whispered. The word came out fragile. I did not answer immediately. Because what does a mother say in a moment like that? I wanted to say, "I warned you." I wanted to say, "How could you?" I wanted to say, "I am still your mother." But none of those sentences were complete. I saw something breaking inside him, not pride, not ego. Trust. He had trusted the wrong person. And he had doubted the right one. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I swear I didn't know." I believed him. And that hurt more than if he had been complicit. Because ignorance is quieter. More subtle. It grows in the spaces where you choose not to look too closely. "Knowing isn't only about information," I said softly. "Sometimes it's about courage." He swallowed hard. "Can you forgive me?" There it was. Not shouted. Not demanded. Asked. Forgiveness is not a switch. It is not immediate. It is not owed. I looked at his face. The same eyes he had as a boy when he scraped his knee and tried not to cry. The same mouth that once called me the strongest woman he knew. "I don't promise quickly," I said. "But I'm not closing the door." His shoulders shook. He covered his face with one hand. I did not touch him. Not yet. Because healing is not performed in public. It is built in private, slowly, with honesty instead of denial. The officers approached Courtney. She stood with practiced dignity, chin lifted. When they guided her toward the exit, she did not turn back. She knew how to leave a room. Ryan and I remained seated after most people had filed out, The courtroom felt larger now. Colder. He stared ahead. I thought she was protecting us, he said quietly. I thought you were slipping. The word lingered. I let it. The most dangerous lies, I replied, sound like concern. He nodded once painfully. As we stood to leave, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not relief. Clarity. The most terrifying part had not been the attempted theft. It had been the attempt to erase me, to make me appear unreliable, unstable, replaceable. But I was none of those things. I walked out of the courtroom slowly, my steps measured. The ocean air outside felt sharper than usual. Stronger. Clearer. And so did I. I sold the condo 3 months after the trial. Not because I was afraid. Because I no longer wanted walls that had witnessed that kind of calculation. The paperwork was simple. I had always kept things organized. The realtor tried to persuade me to wait for a slightly better market window, but I was not negotiating for profit. I was negotiating for peace. The day I handed over the keys, I walked through each room slowly. The living room where Ryan once built blanket forts. The kitchen where I had measured sugar with quiet trust. The hallway where authority echoed toward my door. I did not cry. I thanked the space and left. I moved closer to the coast, near Seward, where the air carries salt and something honest. My new home is smaller. Fewer rooms. Fewer corners for shadows to gather. The ocean outside my window sounds different here. Stronger. Cleaner. In the mornings, I sit at a small wooden table with coffee and watch fishing boats move across the horizon like deliberate thoughts. I breathe without checking whether I have forgotten something. Because I have not. I began volunteering at a women's legal support center 2 weeks after I moved. The first time I walked into that office, I recognized the look in the waiting room immediately. Women holding folders too tightly. Women speaking softly, as if their own certainty required permission. Some of them were younger than I expected. Some were my age. Different stories. Same pattern. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm just tired. I tell them what I learned the hard way. Documentation is not paranoia. Preparation is not aggression. Boundaries are not cruelty. Sometimes I simply sit beside them and let them finish speaking without interruption. That alone can feel revolutionary. Ryan is in therapy now. He asked me to attend 1 session with him. I agreed. He did not defend her. He did not excuse himself. He said something I had waited months to hear. I chose comfort over truth. There is no shortcut back from that sentence. But there is honesty. We are rebuilding slowly. Not perfectly. There are pauses in our conversations now where there used to be ease. There are topics we approach carefully, like glassware we both remember shattering. Trust does not return as it once was. It returns differently. Stronger in some places. Fragile in others. We do not pretend nothing happened. We acknowledge it. And that is new. I no longer finance his life. He no longer assumes I will. When he visits, he brings groceries. He fixes small things around the house without announcing that he has done so. Once, while tightening a hinge on my kitchen cabinet, he said quietly, "I should have listened to you sooner." I did not respond with triumph. I handed him a screwdriver and said, "You're listening now." At night, I sometimes think about how close I came to losing more than property. Not money. Identity. Voice. The most dangerous part of manipulation is not what it takes. It is what it convinces you to doubt. I no longer doubt myself. If someone tries to convince you that you are losing your mind, ask yourself a simple question. Who benefits from that belief? Manipulation often wears the mask of concern. I share this not to frighten you, but to steady you. Names and certain details have been changed for privacy. If you have ever ignored a red flag because you did not want to hurt someone you love, I understand. We want peace. We want harmony. We want to believe that affection equals safety. But safety does not ask you to shrink. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you are listening from. And stay for the next one. Because surviving betrayal is not the end of a life. Sometimes, it is the moment you finally begin living it on your own terms. There is one thing I understand now with absolute clarity. When someone begins questioning your memory, your stability, your judgment, pause. Do not rush to defend yourself. Do not immediately apologize for being difficult. Ask one quiet, powerful question. Who benefits if I start doubting myself? Control rarely arrives with shouting. Comes wrapped in concern, in soft voices, in phrases like "for your own good." If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever silenced your instincts to keep peace with someone you loved? And if you choose to stay, there is another story waiting. Because sometimes surviving betrayal is only the beginning of reclaiming yourself.